Okay, this is Hillel Faerman. We're at HaYeshiva Nafshi, and we're learning Maseches Beitsa here in the afternoon. Baruch Hashem, we're on Daf Lamed Aleph. That means we've covered about 30 pages already, every day plugging away, having a great time, and it's a wonderful Masechta. Please join us. Lamed Aleph, Lamed Aleph, 31a. We've done a bit of the Mishnah, which is a Chiddush in gathering wood on Yom Tov, which is principally a question of muktzah. At what point do we consider pieces of wood to be muktzah and therefore off limits, or because he either prepared them in advance or his mind is sufficiently thinking about them, they're not muktzah, and that's the question. So far we saw the Mishnah, which said principally it's a decision based on its location. Is it located within a field, an open field? Then we assume it's muktzah, unless he does something beforehand to show us that he's intending to use it, which would be to, for example, gather the wood together in a pile. Then he'd be allowed to use it on Yom Tov. If he had done that beforehand, he had prepared it, so to speak. That we've seen before in the Masechta. We saw it, for example, with different birds that were like in a birdhouse. When if he prepared it beforehand, then he could take them on Yom Tov. Different cases we've had before in the Masechta. So this isn't such a new idea. Just technically we have to know what things that our sages estimate that his mind is not sufficiently fixed upon, that he has to go ahead and do something to show that he wants it beforehand. So that would be according to everyone in our Mishnah, that if open field you'd have to show by making a pile beforehand, but if it's within an enclosure, a fenced-in area, then it depends. According to Rebbe Yehuda, the Tana, he says as long as it's right next to the city, just next to the edge of the city, then it's fine. Because again, it's close enough in proximity and it's within an enclosed area, then it doesn't have to be piled up. We assume he intends to use it even if he doesn't show us with some kind of action. But according to Rabbi Yossi, it seems that he's more makel. He says even if it's farther away, if it's a fenced-in area that's farther away, you can still take it even if it's scattered about. He mentions that you need a key to get in, so it seems like he's machmer with another item, which is that it has to be locked up. If it's a locked enclosed area, then you don't have to gather it beforehand to show you want to use it, but rather just the fact that it's in such an area, even if it's not next to the city, but it's within the Techum. Of course, Rashi points out at the beginning of the Mishnah that everything we're talking about is within the Techum, but he mentions it as well, B'sochat Techum Shabbos, which means it's the same area, 2,000 amas, that you have the same kind of leeway on Yom Tov as on Shabbos, 2,000 amas to each side of beyond the city limits. Okay, so we saw the Rashis and the Mishnah, we got the picture of the Mishnah, everything seemed to be working well, like many Mishnayos, till you look at the Gemora. Then the Gemora kind of puts a monkey wrench in the whole works. What happens when you get to the Gemora? All of a sudden we see Shmuel, who's an Amora, so he shouldn't be arguing with the Mishnah, and yet he says something that's completely against the Mishnah, in a strict way, not in a lenient way. He says, no, that even if it's in a karpave, we still have to make sure it's piled up beforehand, which means he went and did this action of piling it up to show that he wants to use it, and that even if it's within an enclosure, which the Mishnah said you don't need to do if it's an enclosure. Here he says it has to be piled up even in an enclosure. So seemingly there's no case in which you don't have to pile it up beforehand to show that you want to use it. Even in an enclosure, you'd have to do the same act beforehand to show that you want to use it. So it's completely against our Mishnah. So the Gemora asks, how can that be? How can Reb Shmuel, the Amora, go against the Mishnah? Even though it's going against it in a way of being more strict, it's still called going against the Mishnah. Why? How could Shmuel do that? Why would he do that? It's not like Amoraim to go against Tanoim. And we pointed out yesterday that Shmuel is a first generation Amora. He came right after the end of the Tanoim, right after Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi had put together the Mishnah. So very little time between them to suppose that maybe there was Yeridas Adoros, the generations went down in caring about the mitzvahs, maybe they have to be more careful, they made a decree, midrabban, to be more careful, so maybe that's why. No, Gemora doesn't assume that. The Gemora says right away, it's a question. We're not going to suppose there was some kind of decree that beyond the Mishnah, because it was too close in time. That's what I'm supposing. Okay, so shall we do the Gemora with that in mind?
Right. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Ein Mevi'im Eitzim Ele Min HaMichnosim.
Michunasim. Like many times you have the u sound in the middle of a word to show that that's its condition. Mizumanim.
That's to say, Samara Shmuel, you're not to bring wood. I mean, you're only allowed to bring wood from a
Eino Elos only.
Yeah, from a gathering of wood, right?
Not necessarily because it's gathered per se, but because that shows us that he did it beforehand to prepare it for Yom Tov.
Shiba Karpava.
Even if it's Shiba Karpef, right? We already knew in the Mishnah that if it's in an open field, then you have to have it piled up. But we thought if it's in a Karpef, you can get around that. You can get it. You don't have to. You can dispense with that chumrah. He's saying no.
Didn't we learn in our Mishnah that from a karpaf a few minha has mifuzri. Even in a karpaf, you're allowed to bring it if it's scattered.
Right. As long as you're taken from a karpef, which is an enclosed area, somewhat protected, as Rosh said in the Mishnah, then you don't have to worry about it being gathered up. Even if it's scattered about, you can gather it on Yom Tov. No problem of muksa. That's what our Mishnah said. So here we have a problem. Shmuel seems to be going against the Mishnah. Says the Gemora, it's not a problem. Why? Our Mishnah is what? No.
No?
No.
Oh, sorry. It follows a personal input, a single, the minority
right.
input.
It's a minority opinion, therefore Shmuel knew that apparently, and he was aware of the majority opinion, and therefore he just did simply what we're supposed to do, which is to follow the majority. Even if the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, chose to follow the minority for whatever reason. Sometimes he was allowed to do that, being he was not only the editor of the Mishnahs, he was also a posek. He could decide to follow the minority in given cases because he liked the idea, right? He agreed with the logic. So, okay, if the Mishnah is a minority opinion, that explains how Shmuel could go like the majority, and he's not going against a Mishnah because the Mishnah itself is going against the majority, and therefore he's just upholding the long-standing tradition or halacha, which is to go like the majority. But how do we know there is such a thing?
Because the Tanya is in a Beitsa, Amar Rav Shmuel ben Elazar. Shimon ben Elazar. Rav Shimon ben Elazar said, Lo nichlaku Beit Shammai Beit Hillel, that they don't argue about Hamufozir, Hamufzorim, Sheba Sedros, in a field. And if wood is scattered in a field, they don't argue that it's not allowed. Sha'ain Movavi.
That's what they don't disagree. Sha'ain Movavi. Everyone is in agreement that you're not allowed to touch it. Which is also different than our Mishnah, by the way. Because our Mishnah said if it was, it did say if it was scattered you couldn't take it, but it did say that if it's gathered you could. If it's piled up you could. Okay, so we haven't discussed that yet, sorry. Michu Nasim.
The gathered wood Sheba Karpa, that's in the enclosure.
Right.
And Shemavi in.
That's what they do agree as well.
You can bring it.
Right. So they agree in both extremes. If it's the most, let's say, wild case, in a sada and scattered. No. And if it's in an enclosure and gathered, then you're allowed.
Sorry, you're allowed.
So basically, we were saying yesterday, there's two variables. If it's in an open area or a closed area, and if it's gathered or scattered. So it's like saying, if you're lacking both of those qualities, as it were, then you can't take it. If you have both of those qualities, then you can take it. If it has only one out of the two, then it's going to be a machlokus, according to him.
So, Omar Nichlaku, what are they arguing about?
Mifuzarim
Sheba Karpa. All Hameku Nasim Sheba Sados. And they argue about these two things. They argue about the scattered wood in the
inside the enclosure,
and they argue about the part of wood in the field.
Right. So in any case where you have one mila, you have one quality working in your favor, what do? That's a machlokus. You either have it piled in a field, so it doesn't have the enclosure aspect, but it does have the piled up, or it's scattered in an enclosure, so you don't have the wood being piled and working in your favor, but you do have the enclosure working in your favor. So when you have one factor working in your favor, that's where they argue. That's where Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argue that what?
Beis Shammai omrim lo yivi'i, uBeit Hillel omrim yivi'i. So Beis Shammai says you cannot take it, and Beis Hillel says you can't take it.
Right. It's actually in the future tense. He should
take it.
Not take it, or he should take it. Right. So therefore, that would be like our Mishnah in the sense of what? That our Mishnah would be like what? Beis Hillel in that respect. Reb Shimon ben Elazar's opinion, but according to the Beis Hillel aspect of his opinion. That's why in our Mishnah it says if you have one mila, either gathered in a field or even scattered in an enclosure, it's okay. Right? And even though it is not mentioned here at all, two factors that were mentioned in the Mishnah, whether it's close to the city or not, or whether it has a lock or not, those seem to be like small details within the general sheet of Beis Hillel. So generally Beis Hillel, the general description of Beis Hillel is, as long as you have one of the two milas, either gathered, then you don't need to have an enclosure. It could be even in an open field. Or you have an enclosure, then you don't need gathered, you can have it even scattered. Either one of those, when you have one out of two factors working in your favor, according to Reb Shimon ben Elazar, then Beis Hillel would be matir. And that's what it says in our Mishnah, albeit with a few details added, right? The question of proximity to the city. The Rabbi Yehuda says it has to be right next to the city, and Rabbi Yossi says no, it doesn't, but at least it has to have a lock. But either way, that's just a detail within the general Shita of Beis Hillel. So our Mishnah would be according to Beis Hillel, the way Shmuel's learning, but only Reb Shimon ben Elazar's view of that. And by the way, this isn't unusual. There are many Gemoras that will say that there's a machlokas Tanoim about the Tanoim. Right? So we don't just have cases of the Tanoim arguing, we have later Tanoim arguing about earlier Tanoim. Very often this exact case where we have Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, that everybody knows they argued about something on this particular topic, but the exact way that they argued, or the exact factors they were arguing about, that can be a machlokas later Tanoim about the earlier Tanoim. As we know, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argued about many things, but that itself became a subject of debate later on, because the period of the Tanoim was about 300 years, right? From just when they returned after the first temple, all the way up until really the destruction of the temple. So that would make it about 400 years actually. And even after the destruction of the temple, there were still Tanoim, because we know the famous story about Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues, and seeing the destruction of the temple, seeing where the Kodesh HaKodashim had been, etc. At the end of Gemora, at the end of Makos. So I see that the period of Tanoim, and it was about 400 years, which is described in Pirkei Avos, right? It says there was the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, that they were in the first temple, and then after that was Shimon HaTzadik. He was like the first generation in the second temple, after they came back from Babel. So that period from Shimon HaTzadik all the way till the end of the Tanoim, which would be basically Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, or as he's called often, just Rebbe, that was about 420 years. 410 years or 420 years?
20, the second temple.
20. Okay, so apparently Beis Shammai, Hillel and Shammai themselves are much earlier on in that period. If you look in Pirkei Avos, Hillel and Shammai are much earlier on. But Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel were coming after the Hillel and Shammai period. They had their yeshivas which lasted, and or as they're called in translations, the academies of Shammai, or the Academy of Hillel. And there developed many more machlokas between those two. But between Shammai and Hillel themselves, interestingly enough, the Gemora says there were only 3 machlokas. There was only 3 cases they argued about. And then later there were more. But now we're saying that even beyond the fact that they argued amongst themselves, we had even within, let's say, Beis Hillel, an argument about what had been the machlokas Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. And here we have a case in point. Reb Shimon ben Elazar is saying that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel were arguing in this case where you have one factor working in your favor, either an enclosed area or the fact that it's piled up. In such a case, Beis Hillel was Mekel and Beis Shammai was Machmer, as we know them to be. Generally speaking, the Beis Hillel would say one factor is enough to decide that it's not Muksa, to decide the fellow had been thinking about this object enough to allow him to use it on Yom Tov. Whereas Beis Shammai would say no, one factor is not enough, you need 2. You need it to be both enclosed and gathered. Seemingly, at this point at least, Shmuel, who said before you need both karpef and mechunasim, you need it to be both in an enclosure and to be piled up, he sounds like he's going like Beis Shammai, which is maybe even worse now than the beginning. In the beginning we just thought he's against the mission. Now we have him holding like Beis Shammai against Beis Hillel. It's even worse, but that's the point. This is only according to Reb Shimon ben Elazar. But there's another opinion that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel did not argue on this. They argued on a slightly different set of factors, and therefore, according to that, Shmuel's going to make sense. Let's go on then. No, just a second. So Rava's already in Amora, that's not going to help us. So the Beitsa has ended. If I see Rava being brought down, that means I'm finished with the Beitsa. That's a very strange Beitsa then. I was expecting to see Reb Shimon Elazar saying his bit, and then the Rabbanan saying their bit. And the Rabbanan coming out with a description of Beishai and Beis Hillel being much more in line with what Shmuel was talking about. But now we have to sort of guess, or maybe look at Rashi. If there's not going to be an elucidation of the Shita of the Rabbanan, we're just being told that there is a Rabbanan. How did we know there's a Rabbanan? It must be because it was presented as Reb Shimon ben Elazar's opinion. We kind of already understand by ourselves that the Rabbanan don't hold that way. But now it's becoming a bit murky. There's no real Beitsa that says the Rabbanan held like Shmuel is saying. It's Shmuel's opinion that this Beitsa, which depicts Reb Shimon ben Elazar's opinion, is a minority opinion, that not everybody held like him. And he would interpret the Beitsa to be exactly that point. His opinion is that Beishai and Beis Hillel argued on this situation where there's one factor in the guy's favor. But according to the Rabbanim, they didn't argue about that. Either they argued on something else, or they just never argued on it. Not clear how Shmuel was taking this Beitsa and using it in his favor. I mean, he doesn't have anything positive, no proof positive to his position at this point. A bit strange. Okay, we'll have to wait till we get to Rava. I feel there's a gaping hole in the Gemora. Where are the Rabbanan who we've been promised? I would have liked to have seen a Rabbanan mentioned who hold like Shmuel. It seems like it's just implied, it's inferred that there is a Rabbanan. By saying Reb Shimon Elazar's opinion, it's like implying, and the Rabbanan don't hold like that. What do they hold? Seemingly it's understood that they hold like Shmuel. That either there was no machlokus, everybody seems to require two factors, both karpev and mechunasim. I'm not sure where that comes from, how we know that, but just the very fact that it's all attributed to Reb Shimon Elazar, implying it's his opinion, but the Rabbanan argue. What do they hold? More machmer or more mako? I don't know. Seemed like he knew that Shmuel knew that maybe he had a Kabbalah. I don't know. Just 1 second, let's see. Alright, I see a little bit of a window. Maybe Rashi gets into it as well, but I looked quickly at the Rabbeinu Hananel. I don't know how your eyes are if you're good at reading the Rabbeinu Hananel, but the Rabbeinu Hananel was an earlier authority than Rashi, by the way.
Yeah, okay.
Have it there?
I have it.
Many Gemoras have the Rabbeinu Hananel on them. The Rabbeinu Hananel was sort of a precursor to Rashi. He also wrote a running commentary to the Gemora, much less descriptive than Rashi's. And for most of us, it's insufficient. But here and there, he elucidates things that Rashi doesn't mention, even though we haven't quite seen Rashi yet, so perhaps we're preempting Rashi in this case. But we'll have to see when we get to Rashi if he says anything along these lines. But I see in the Rabbeinu Hananel, who, by the way, they say he was at the end of the Gaonim. You know, there's a whole period called the Gaonim, which is way before the Rishonim. And some say it was right after the Gemora, but officially I think there was Savoroim after the Amoraim. When the Gemora finished, there was no more Amoraim, but it was Savoroim, I think. And then there was Gaonim, which include Rab Hai Gaon, and that includes Rab Sadia Gaon, more famous ones. And then there's all the way up until, apparently they say Rabbeinu Hanan was sort of at the very tail end of that. So he's extremely prestigious in that respect, very well respected by the other Rishonim. In any event, we don't always talk about the Rabbeinu Hananel. In fact, I don't think we always had the Rabbeinu Hananel on the Gemora. A lot of times they dug up manuscripts and so forth, and then we ended up with the Rabbeinu Hananel. But on many Gemoras now, at least, we do have the Rabbeinu Hananel printed in the margin. So look at the Rabbeinu Hananel now, if you can.
Okay, let me put on my Rabbeinu Hananel.
Yeah. Put on your super duper X-ray glasses. Let's see what we can get.
Ta-da. Okay.
Better now?
Yeah.
All right, so I'll do a little bit of the reading, but I just want to point out, majorly just one or two lines.
I can read this.
Yeah. Mechunas. He doesn't have mechunasim, he just says mechunas. See, he says the Mishnah without even Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, just relating to the one factor. Doesn't need to be gathered together if it's in an enclosure. Just on that point, he says the Mishnah in its most terse outline, really, if you think about it. It's not the Mishnah that's in front of us. He's not really saying over the Mishnah that we just saw. Right? What we just read in the Rabbeinu Chananel is a much more terse expression of our Mishnah, but it's the factors that are important that the Gemora is going to focus on. If it's in a karpeif, do you need it to be mechunas? Right? Etc. Right? That's what you just read from the Mishnah. The barest details. If it's in a sada, then it needs to be mechunas, but if it's in a karpeif, it doesn't need to be, it can be mefuzar. So that would be like Rabbi Shimon Elazar's opinion according to Beis Hillel, which Gemora is going to say. Okay? Now he goes on to Shmuel. This is not Rabbi Yehuda, this is Rabbi Yehuda the Amora in the name of Shmuel. Mechunasim, shebekarpeif. You need both factors, mechunas and karpeif. Akshinan, and we ask. See, he's not just quoting the Gemora, he's giving commentary. He's saying, and at that point the Gemora asks, we ask
about it.
Anantanan. Infuzar and shebekarpeif. Right? As long as it's within a karpeif, our Mishnah said it doesn't have to be mechunas, it could be even mefuzar. So then the Gemora answers, according to his version, the Gemora is answering. No, misnisin in the brackets.
What did I say?
Oh, that's what you were saying? Sorry.
From our...
Not from, just our Mishnah.
Our Mishnah, it's from you, right?
No, is a Yechida.
Oh, sorry, I keep on saying that.
It's a Yachid.
Right. Looks like Yehuda.
It's a minority opinion. It's a single opinion. Disanya, how do we know that? Because we learned in a Beitsa. Shebesados, etc. He says they don't argue about that, then everyone agrees it's Aser, etc. Now that etc. is the whole Beitsa we just read in the Mishnah, in the Gemora. He's not even going to quote that because he's not trying to supplant the Gemora. There's a Gemora that already has the whole Beitsa. Right? What we just read in the Gemora, he's saying V'chula because he knows we have the Gemora. Right? But look what he adds at the end of all of that. B'tosefta. So according to the Rabbeinu Chananel, our Gemora is not the complete picture, as I complained. Where's the other opinion? He says it's Rabbi Natan. And where would you find this? In the Tosefta.
Right. That's an additional Mishnah?
No, Tosefta is like a whole new set of Mishnayos that got put together by a Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. The way I like to explain it is like when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi put together the Mishnayos, out of, let's say, 100,000 brises, he picked, let's say, 50,000 for the Mishnayos. I don't think there's 50,000 Mishnayos. I think there's only 4,000 something or whatever. So let's make it simpler then. Out of 20,000 brises, he picked 4,000 and something for the Mishnayos. And then he fixed them up, but he put them in an order, but basically he picked out the choicest brises, right? So let's say if what I'm saying is true, something along the lines of 20,000 brises, he picked out 4,000 for the Mishnayos, and then fixed them up and put them in a certain order. That's what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi did. But his Talmud said, look, but there's still 16,000 brises which need need more organization. You can't just leave them in disarray. So he took that last 16,000, he picked out another, let's say 3,000 or so, and put together what's called the Tosefta. And he did it very much along the same scheme as a Mishnah. So if you take what you're learning in the Masechta with the Mishnayos, let's say you could do it, even you're learning Mishnayos in the evening, you could take that same Masechta of Mishnayos and look in the Tosefta and see how it's very similar. It follows a similar kind of a pattern, goes from one subject to another in a sort of similar way, but with slightly different, people talking and subjects brought up, a little bit more detail in a way than the Mishnayos sometimes. So very often that's what the Gemora will do. The Gemora, in order to enlarge on the Mishnah, will bring a Tosefta and show you that it's a slightly larger picture than the Mishnayos have that on. This is a good example.
So the Raisa of the Gemora is like the Tosefta of the
It's like, sometimes it actually is a Tosefta. Like if you take the Rabbeinu Hananel literally here, I would say, without looking at the Tosefta, which would be the right thing to do right now, but maybe we'll do it if you want, but to really look up a Tosefta, you need a proper Gemora. A real Gemora with all the Meforshim in the back will have a Tosefta in the back. Not every Gemora has the Tosefta in the back, but a normal Gemora that's just with the normal Meforshim of a regular Gemora, not a Gemora that's been written, let's say, by a subsidy that we get only just the Gemora and very little in addition to the Gemora. But a regular Gemora that has a lot of stuff in the back will have also Tosefta. In fact, the last thing in most printed Gemoras is the Tosefta. Okay, so you might even find it in your Gemora. If you look on the very last page, you might see at the top of the page the word Tosefta. If you want to turn to the back of your Gemora, you may find it. If they, yours is a very thin Gemora, but maybe it's just Beitsa, but maybe they still put in the Tosefta. Look at the very last few pages. See at the top of the page there anything saying Tosefta?
It's got it here. Tosefta, Tosefta.
Tosefta.
So
if you look
Tosefot.
Tosefot?
Yeah. Tosefei, Tosefot.
Oh, so it's not necessarily what we're talking about.
Tosefei, Tosefot.
Okay, keep going.
No, it's all the same.
Is it the very last pages? There's more. Is there any more pages there? So go maybe just before that.
It's all like Tosefot.
Same thing?
Same thing.
Yeah. Alright, well, perhaps we'll go and get a regular Gemora at this point. I mean, we have it down here, but down here is with a lot of other Masechtas in the volume. But it doesn't matter. It could be Kedai. Surprised you don't know the Tosefta. Let me just check.
Maybe it is. It's
No.
the Tosefei, Tosefot.
Yeah, see, these are the inexpensive Gemoras. They'll put to compendium. It's like a compendium. It's almost like a Reader's Digest of all the other Meforshim. Instead of the real Gemora, they'll actually print a lot of the real stuff. Okay, so it's not. Let me show you with the real Gemora. There's one. Beitsa. Another one. Doesn't look like it. Oh, here it is. Let's see. I think this must be Shirley's. I think you can use it. Okay, so here you see it's Beitsa. So let's go to the back. So here's the Rif. The Rabbeinu Nissim is the Ram, and the Rif, version of Rashi. In the back of that should be the Tosefta, but see the Mordechai, one of the last commentators in the Rebbe War. Here's the Tosefta. See? Tosefta. Okay, now, I'm not sure which parak it would be in. According to what we're learning, it should be in the same parak that we are, which is the fourth parak. Let's see if it is. You see, in our Gemora, if you lift that up for 1 second, keep your hand there, but lift the whole thing up so you see your normal Gemora, where we are. In mine, at least, it has in the margin, in brackets, exactly where it says Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar in the Gemora, off to the side, off to the right-hand side in mine, it has a brackets in the very right-hand margin saying Tosefta. See that?
Yeah. Pei Gimel.
You know what that means? Pei Gimel, Parak
Pei
Gimel.
Gimel. Right.
That means even though we're in the fourth parak of the Gemora, when this Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote the Tosefta, he didn't necessarily keep the same parak type thing. It's a very similar pattern, but not always a replica. So here, if we look up the Tosefta in Parak Gimel, we should find this Beitsa that's being alluded to. Let's see if we can find it here.
Got it.
Got it?
Yeah.
What page is it on? Base? No, up the top. Upper left. Does it say a number?
No.
No? Alright. Well, in the column, I have it on page base here. Parak Gimel. And then is it in that column or is it in the next page?
Pei Gimel is on Aleph.
Yeah, but when you found it, is it in that column or in the next page?
No, it's in this column.
In that column. Okay, which Tosefta, which number? Number.
Beitsa Parak Beit Gimel.
No.
Gimel Aleph.
We're in Parak Gimel of the Tosefta. The first thing it says Bibri.
Yeah, it's Aleph.
That's not the one we want though.
Which
It's
one?
about fish. Bibrim, our little ponds of fish.
Oh, shit, okay.
And then the next one is Shochtim Nigarim. Another thing about Shechita. So that's not what we want. We want something about wood inside of a carpave. I don't see anything there. Do you see anything? I think it's on the next page. Let's just try the next page. Well, here it is. Turn the page. See, there's ches there, 5, 6 lines down. It says a ches, a big ches.
Yes.
Reb Shimon ben Elazar.
Lo
Lo nechlaku
Yeah.
b'shayim b'Hillel ala mechunasim shebekarpeiv sheyaviu. So he brings first where they have both factors, mechunasim and karpeiv. Everyone agrees sheyaviu. Ve'ala mefuzarim shebesadeh shelo yaviu. So the order was changed. Our Gemora brought in the opposite order. But again, where you're lacking both factors, it's in an open field and it's mefuzar, you can't take. Al ma'nechlaku. You with me?
Yes.
Al mefuzarim shebekarpeiv. If it's scattered about within an enclosure, va'al mechunasim shebesadeh, and if it's gathered within an open field, then according to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, shebei shamei omrim lo yaviu. The Shamri say you can't take it from those areas. Beis Hillel omrim yaviu, you're allowed to take it from those areas. Here we go. Amar Rabbi Nassan, this is what the Rabbeinu Hananel promised us, that after Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar there's another opinion, but our Gemora failed to bring it for some reason, which is a bit strange, but it was alluding to it by telling us that Shmuel went against the Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Lo nechlaku beis Shammai u'beis Hillel al ha'mefuzarim shebekarpeiv. He says they did not argue about if it was scattered about within the enclosure. Va'al ha'mechunasim shebesadeh, or if even it was gathered up in the open field. Sheyaviu, that you're allowed to bring it. Al ma'nechlaku al ha'mefuzarim shebesadeh. If it's scattered about in the open field, that's the only case they argue about. Shebei Shammai omrim lo yaviu, Beis Hillel omrim yaviu. so let's take a look at this for a minute. So according to Rabbi Nassan, if it is Mefuzer in the Karpef, he says Yaviu. Sounds strange. Wow. That's not like Shmuel. Shmuel said it has to be Mechunas in the Karpef. He says if it's Mefuzer in the Karpef, everybody says Yaviu. Well, that's not what Shmuel said. Shmuel said it has to be Mechunas in the Karpef.
Yeah.
How are we attributing Shmuel to this opinion? This opinion says every Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel let you take it if it's Mefuzer in the Karpef. That's not like Shmuel.
Shmuel goes against the...
Yeah, he was supposed to be like Rabbi Nassan. That's what the Rabbeinu Chananel said. Wow. So something's not right here. Well, Mechunasim Shebasadeh, everyone agrees Yaviu. Okay. Al Ma'nechlaku, Al Mefuzarim Shebasadeh. It's scattered about in the Sadeh. Beis Shammai says no, and Beis Hillel says yes. I don't think that this applies to Shmuel, but the Rabbeinu Chananel says it does. So the Rabbeinu Chananel must have a slightly different version of the Tosefta where it does agree with Shmuel. It's a bit strange. Now my interest is piqued, as they say.
This is where my interest goes to sleep.
Huh?
This is where my interest goes to sleep.
Oh, really?
No.
Okay, so I'll abandon this.
No, I want to.
Well, we have to see Rashi anyway, so perhaps we've jumped the gun to see the Rabbeinu Chananel, assuming that would help us. Normally it does. But here it just becomes more confusing following the Rabbeinu Chananel. So let's do what we normally do. Let's see Rashi. Let's see if Rashi bails us out over here, because I hope that Rashi will...
Is this very long Rashi thing?
I don't think so. That's another whole nother subject. It's later on.
It is. Right.
I don't know. Okay, let's see. Let's go into... We already saw one Rashi in the Gemora.
Yeah. The Yodiyai Haya.
Yechida. You know how you learn to say this word?
I am having trouble seeing the letters actually. It looks like Yehuda actually.
No, but you've done that 3 times. No, it's a ches.
Yehuda.
The ches is completely enclosed, meaning except for the very bottom of the ches, but the other corners of the ches are completely enclosed. There's no space between the roof and the legs. Whereas a hay, on the one side looks like a ches, this complete enclosed corner, like a dalid, right? A hay is like a dalid on the right-hand corner, but on the left-hand corner is completely open. Whereas this is completely closed both on the right-hand side and on the left-hand side. You see the difference between this and a...
Yeah, sure I can see it, but
Alright, so the real word is yachid.
Yachidai.
No, but the real word is related to the Hebrew word yachid.
Yachid, right.
An individual.
One.
Which is also, I was going to say that even if we didn't have any other problems with the Rabbeinu Chananel and the Tosefta, I was going to say this bothers me, that the Gemora, by saying our Mishnah is a Yachid, I was expecting a Rabim somewhere. And he's saying, no, Shmuel's going like Rabbi Nassan in the Tosefta. That kind of makes it sound like he chose one Yachid over another. There really aren't a Rabbanan. There's only Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon Elazar versus Rabbi Nassan. So that bothers me as well. Why would you accuse our Mishnah of being a Yechidah, which means it's going like an individual versus the majority? Where are the majority? I see Rabbi Nassan as the only other opinion. He's also a Yachid. So then you have to readjust what the Gemora was saying. Our Mishnah is one opinion, and Shmuel followed the other opinion, meaning Rabbi Nassan, because he just tends to follow Rabbi Nassan. Which is fine. If you tell me Shmuel goes like Rabbi Nassan, that would be fine. But it's not saying that. By saying Yechidah, that our Mishnah is Yechidah, it's implying that Shmuel's going to make the majority, and he chose not to follow the individual opinion of which is what our Mishnah is. But where are these majority? It's not Rabbi Nassan, he's not a majority, unless you tell me somehow we knew that Rabbi Nassan represents the majority. But again, where do you get that from? Very strange, very strange. So far, I'm not happy with what I'm seeing. I need, let's see. Okay,
Does it just affect
just a minute. Now again, there's no Rashi on this part of the Gemora, only on a later section of Rava. So perhaps we have to see Rava, because there's no Rashi that will explain this. So I'm just as much in the dark after Rashi as I was after the Rebbeinu Chananel. Still don't see, unless you just say sometimes the Gemora has a Kabbalah. And that's what the Gemora is trying to say. Shmuel knew that the Mishnah is going like Reb Shimon Elazar, which is true, and he knew there were Rabbanan who disagreed. Where are these Rabbanan? I don't know where they are. Even if you try like the Rebbeinu Chananel and say it's not a Rabbanan, it's Rabbi Nassan. We looked in the Rabbi Nassan, didn't help us. Rabbi Nassan wasn't exactly what Shmuel was saying either. So there's some Rabbanim somewhere who must say differently. That's all you can say, is that Shmuel had a Kabbalah, perhaps because he was first generation Amora, he knew what the earlier opinions were. So he just happened to know that there was a Rabbanim who argued. How did he know that? It's not in the Tosefta, and he's not bringing any other Beitsa to back himself up, so I don't know how he knew that, but maybe, since there's no Rashi over here, I have to say Rashi felt it self-explanatory, which to me is a bit remarkable. But that's what you often have to say. You have to say what's troubling me wasn't troubling anyone else. And I have to also suppose that since the Rebbeinu Chananel is attributing, he's saying Rabbi Nassan argues, it's true. We look in the Tosefta, we see Rabbi Nassan argues, but that doesn't help us to understand Shmuel. Seemingly he's saying it helps us to understand Shmuel. If that's true, he had another version of Rabbi Nassan in Tosefta than we have. In any event, let's go on in the Gemora. Maybe something will get cleared up.
Okay.
One good thing is when Shmuel gets back, we have to learn all these Gemoras again. Anyways, so maybe by then we'll have an answer. In the meantime, look at this as just preparing ourselves for that eventuality.
So Shammai says that you're not to bring in the future. Hillel says you may bring. Right?
Even if there's just one factor, which that would be like our Mishnah. And we'd have to say that Shmuel somehow knew that the Rabbanan argued, and that you need two factors. You need both karpef, enclosure, and you need mechunasim, you need gathered. That's what Shmuel is saying.
Mechunasim is not gathered.
It's gathered.
Mechunas?
Mefuzarim is gathered.
Mefuzarim, sorry. Yeah.
Mechunasim is gathered.
Mechunasim, okay. Sorry. I'm sorry.
I think of Beit Knesset.
See, already I'm thinking. Already, I think I'm a Gemora student, scholar.
Yeah.
No, okay.
You can.
It's called chutzpah.
You can. It's fine. There's a precedent for that.
There is.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
So
Amar Rava.
Amar Rava. Alay kanim. Alay kanim. So these are the wings of.
No. Leaves.
What did I say? Wings. Leaves. Kanim or reeds?
Reeds.
Reeds. Va'alei kafanim, and the leaves of grapevine leaves.
Right.
Va'afalgav, even though dimach nufei, I don't know what that is.
That's actually the word for wings, kind of fine. Mecham fi lahu, but it doesn't necessarily mean that in Aramaic. Even though, let's say, he gathers it up.
Yeah. Even though, so that means gathered up?
I think so. We'll have to see in Rashi, but okay.
Damikam fei lahu, v'mutavi. I'm not sure what that is.
Mutve are the ones that are lying down, like Moshav. Let's just read through it, and then we'll try to go back and understand it.
Kevan, since the E, the Madli Ziki.
Zika. Zika is a wind.
This we either daven or we read something.
What?
On Shabbos this comes up, these two words.
Not sure, but these are Aramaic words, so normally in davening, Aramaic doesn't come up. There's only a few places in davening we use Aramaic. When we translate the Kedusha in Uvalatzion, that's a translation of Hebrew into Aramaic. And we also have in the B'rich Shemay, when we're taking out the Sefer Torah, there's a Zohar, a little section of Zohar we say,
very difficult to read,
which is like a request for long life and a request for other things. So that's the only time I know where Aramaic shows up.
There is Aramaic after you put the Torah back again. There are a whole group of prayers which are in Aramaic.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Maybe it's a Chabad. Maybe. What do you do after you put the Torah back again? You say Ashrei?
Well, no, there are a few things we say. If it's Birkus Chodesh, and we bench the Chodesh. If it's
just before that.
There are other psukim, things we say about people who died al Kiddush Hashem. There's a whole section there about dying al Kiddush Hashem.
It's for the good of the community and for your health and for your.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. We say, that's right. What's that called? You're right. Maybe that is in Aramaic. What's that called?
Like three of them.
Yeah, no, there's two. There's one for if you're at home, you say it, but for the other, if you're only at home, you don't say it. Just a second.
I think the last one is Adorachman.
Yeah, no. You're right. There's another section there. Let's just look it up already. Stop torturing ourselves.
And the last one, I think we leave out when we do the Chodesh thing.
Yakum Purkan.
Yeah,
you're right. That is Aramaic. Yakum Purkan. Purkan is an Aramaic word. Shemaya is Aramaic. China v'chiza is an aleph at the end of each word is an Aramaic. Yeah. So you're right in that respect. These are Aramaic tefillos and Aramaic.
I have a feeling that these words also come in there somewhere. Because on Shabbos I asked someone who was sitting next to me, what do they mean?
Yeah.
And he said something about the wind blowing.
Well, that is Zika. Zika is wind, and Madli means to raise up. So it's like when the wind blows, like it's raised up, as it were. The wind is raised up. The wind blew up, as we say. Okay, Kivan de'i Madli Zika, if the wind starts blowing, let's say, Mivader lahu, it will spread them out, scatter them about. So therefore, they're ki mifuzarim damu. They resemble in halacha the case of mifuzarim.
Scattered.
Correct. And that makes them asurim. The
Isurim.
Yeah.
And it's Isur fact. The Etnach.
Asnach.
Mana. And if you put a dish over them or a pot over them.
The Esmo from the day before.
From the day before, anyhow.
Alayhu.
Shaper
Shaper.
That's also okay. That's good.
Shaper means good, right? Yeah. So then their leaves, alayhu, their leaves are shaperdam, are good, are okay to use. We have leaves of these things that people like to use, I'm not sure for what.
So if they're leaves of reeds or something like that, and they're lying around, if you're going to use them, you're not to use them unless you cover them with a pot from the day before.
Yeah. So it says even if, I think it's saying even if you've gathered them up, we have a rule of, certainly according to Shmuel and even according to our Mishnah, it always helps to gather stuff up. So normally if you gather stuff up, you can come the next day and use it. Here we're saying, no, even if you gathered it up the day before, right, you can't use it.
You should cover it.
Yeah, but the first part, before we got to that part about covering, we were saying you can't use it, even if you gathered it up. And according to even Shmuel, he was saying you could gather it up, right? Shmuel kept saying you need to always have it gathered up in an enclosure, right? Even if it's in an enclosure, you have to have it gathered up. That was Shmuel's position. Here, Rav is coming along and saying, but there's these leaves that even if you've gathered them up in a pile, it doesn't help you. Since very often the wind comes and blows them away, so basically, if that would happen, it would be scattered all around, right? If wind would come and blow on this pile, it would... I mean, I don't know how different these leaves are than the leaves I used to pile up when I was a kid. But there were two reasons we had piled leaves when I was a kid. One, because we got paid for raking the lawn, so we like to pile it up and then throw it away in bags and stuff. Also, we like to pile up leaves to jump in them and have a great time. So if you have that pile of leaves, everybody knows that if you leave it overnight, you probably come back the next day, it won't even be there. It'll all have blown away, which means it doesn't entirely blow away, it gets scattered by the winds. You just have to rake them up all over again. So he's saying, look, if you had these leaves that you raked up and you piled up, and you want to come back the next day, and even if you happen to come back the next day and you find them all piled up, that doesn't help you. Because since you know the truth that it wasn't expected to be piled up anymore, it probably was going to be blown away. So even though you lucked out and there was no wind that night, and it didn't get blown away, still in a pile, you can't use it, according to Rava.
Sounds like a gazera, huh?
Huh?
Sounds like a gazera.
Not necessarily. He's saying the same problem with Das. Normally you need to pile it up to show that you want to use it the next day. But he's adding a factor over here. That only helps if by piling it up, you're actually going to find it in that state the next day. If when I pile it up, I don't really expect to find it in a pile the next day, that doesn't help. It's like you did an action like Sisyphus. That helps momentarily, but it's going to be completely obliterated in a few minutes or a few hours. So if I do an action which seemingly shows preparation, but I know that preparation is going to be literally blown away and disintegrate within a few hours, then it's not a true preparation. He's adding another factor that when we say piling it up shows you want to use it the next day, shows your das, shows you want to use it. That's only if the act that you did is going to last. If it's just going to get blown and scattered all around again by the time you come back the next day, then it's not a good preparation. In other words, when you do an act of preparation that shows that you want to use it the next day, it has to be that act was a meaningful act, not just a symbolic act. Because if it's only symbolic, then we say, look, I did pile it up, I showed I'm interested in them, so they get blown, scattered all around again. That doesn't take away the fact that yesterday I came here and showed my intention. But he's saying, no, you didn't really show your intention if it's something that truly would get scattered about again. Because the intention you're showing is that I want to come back tomorrow and use it. But if I know that I'm not going to come back tomorrow and find this pile, then that's not called I did some kind of actual preparation that's going to be usable the next day. So he's basically saying that whole notion that I can come the day before and do an act which shows my intention to use it the next day, it has to be an act that's actually going to be something I can utilize. So that act was a genuine act, as you call it. But if it's just going to be taken away, then it's only symbolic and it's not good enough, because in your mind you know it's not going to be here tomorrow. So you didn't really do something that you intend to come back and use the next day. You really did an ineffectual act. So therefore, he's saying the only way you can properly use it the next day is if you pile it up and do something to ensure that the pile will remain. That can only happen if you cover the pile with a huge pot or a huge bucket or a huge something or other. Then you can say the pile that I left was the pile I intended to come back and find. Because I did an act which truly should have been permanent, that truly should have allowed me to come back the next day and use it.
So why is he putting this in here?
I think he's saying, in my mind, it does two things. It gives me this interesting factor, which is we hadn't thought about before. What if I do something to show my intention to use it, but it's an ineffectual act. It's just a symbolic act. Right? Does the action that I have to do to show that I intend to use an object have to be anything more than a symbolic act? Or does it have to actually be a practical preparation which really sets it up exactly for me to come back and get it tomorrow? He's adding that it has to be practically a real good effectual act that you're going to come back and use the next day. So that information, according to Shmuel, that you really need something to be really physically prepared, you have to actually do an act with your two hands to prepare something to show us that you really want to use it the next day. Well, then it has to be something that's an actually effective act and not just a merely symbolic and ineffectual act. That's what Rav is saying. So that's one important thing that he's bringing to our attention. And there's another thing which I would gain from what he said, which is that not only Shmuel at the beginning of the Gemora, which Shmuel was one of the first Amoraim, told us that he, based on his knowledge of some Rabbanan that we never actually met, but we just have to rely on Shmuel that he knew there was a Rabbanan that argued Reb Shimon Elazar. He was machmir against our Mishnah, against Reb Shimon Elazar, based on his knowledge of these supposed Rabbanan that exist somewhere. Right? And even in Tosefta we didn't find them. But now that I see Rava saying a halacha about the leaves, which is dovetailing Shmuel's halacha. In other words, if you hold like Shmuel, that you need it to be piled up, then you need to know Rava, that when you do pile it up, it has to be in a special way that's going to be effective. So it seems like it's kind of cementing in, also in addition to the mere fact that he's telling us that how to do the preparation, but he's also telling us in a certain way, I think, not necessarily, but I would see it perhaps as that extra step of the Gemora to tell us, and this also shows us that we pass like Shmuel. Because I assume he's talking within an enclosed area, though the truth is he never mentions that specifically. But it seems like he's saying even in an enclosed area, you have to make sure not only it's gathered, but that gathering will remain. It seems like he's saying he's passing like Shmuel as well. But okay, that's already a little bit moot, because you could say, no, maybe he's talking out in the field. Maybe he's not talking in an enclosure.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
It's just puzzling me that Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai agree that if it's
according to Reb Shimon Elazar?
Yeah. That if it's in an enclosure, it needs to be piled up. They're not arguing about that. And if it's in a...
If it's an enclosure, what?
It has to be in an enclosure and piled up.
No?
No?
Oh, according to Reb Shimon Elazar, they agree that if it is in an enclosure and it's piled up, it's for sure good.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying.
It doesn't have to be.
No, that's good, okay. And if it's in a field and it's scattered, it's not good.
Right. Those two are clear.
But what are they agreeing with? What do they argue with?
In the middle category.
Right. If it's in an enclosure,
only one factor.
Scattered,
only one factor.
If it's in an enclosure?
And if it's in an enclosure but scattered, so it only has the enclosure aspect.
Then Hillel will allow us.
Yes.
But that's against the Mishnah.
No, that's
what
the
the
Mishnah says.
That's what the Mishnah.
It's against Shmuel, on which the Gemora is implying, but Shmuel somehow knew there were Rabbanan who held not like this, who said Beis Hillel would never allow such a thing.
Right.
Where he got these Rabbanan from, I have no idea.
But
my worst problem is that I would have expected at least Rashi to do something somewhat along the lines of Rabbeinu Chananel, to try to fill in the gap that's missing in the Gemora. Where are these Rabbanan? At least Rabbeinu Chananel made an attempt to show me a Rabbi Nassim in the Beitsa. When I looked up that Beitsa, it didn't help me. Perhaps Rabbeinu Chananel had a different Beitsa, Tosefta. But at least he made an attempt to fill in the gap. Rosh makes no attempt whatsoever to fill in the gap.
And we can't say that, according to Beis Shammai, that he's with Shmuel either, because he says you should not use it.
Do what?
Beis Shammai says you cannot use it if it's scattered. But,
right.
But can you make it? You can say, but if it's piled up, you can use it.
He said that. He said that. He said they don't argue about that.
They don't argue about it.
Everyone agrees you can use it if it's piled up.
Right, so that's like Shmuel, no?
Yeah, but it's only like Shmuel in the sense that Shmuel says something that everyone will agree on, but I would have thought, who cares? We go like Beis Hillel, I should be able to be more makel than that.
So that perhaps the majority that he's talking about is Beis Shammai.
But you see, then the Gemora should say, our Mishnah's Beis Hillel, and Shmuel's gone like Beis Shammai for some strange reason, which is almost never done, that you have an Amora deciding to go like Beis Shammai over Beis Hillel. That itself would need a real good explanation, which would bother me and if I didn't have one, but let's say you'd be right even, maybe I'd be willing to entertain that notion, but the Gemora doesn't even say that. The Gemora doesn't say, but he's going like Beis Shammai, which would be difficult, and I understand why the Gemora avoids that, but at least that would, you're right, that would explain what he's saying. I actually said that is kind of like the Kasha, he's going like Beis Shammai. How can you go like Beis Shammai? Nobody goes like Beis Shammai. Yeah. Very few places go like Beis Shammai. This is not, I think there's 6. 6 places we go like Beis Shammai over Beis Hillel, and this is not one of them as far as I know. But be that as it may, but the wording of the Gemora doesn't even fit that, because then the Gemora should say, oh, you don't like Shmuel, that he's against the Mishnah, but okay, Shmuel decided to go like Beis Shammai for whatever reason. Okay, so then we'd know what Shmuel was all about, and we'd also know to ignore him, because we don't go like Beis Shammai. I'm sure that we would go like Beis Hillel. But nobody says that. They do the opposite. They tell us Shmuel holds, and then they can say it's Shmuel's opinion. They just say he's right. Our Mishnah is a Yechidah. Once you say our Mishnah is a Yechidah, it's like relegating our Mishnah off to the archives. Like our Mishnah is irrelevant because it's only a one man's opinion, which almost always implies that there's a majority somewhere that argues. So if you're just telling me I have to accept on faith that there is such a majority, I will accept it on faith, right? Jews are all about having faith. But since you bring a Beitsa to show me Reb Shimon Elazar, I would have appreciated someone showing me somewhere this Rabbanan who argued. And I thought the Rebbeinu Chananel was doing that. He's saying, oh, and I bet you wonder who's arguing with Reb Shimon Elazar. It's Rabbi Nassan. At least he made an attempt to fill in the gap. I don't see anyone else. Rosh is not making an attempt. The Gemora certainly doesn't make an attempt. And now all I have is Rava telling me about how to pile up the leaves properly. So I'm feeling scattered.
This word, demach mefei,
I think that's, even though in Hebrew, kanfaim are wings, but in Aramaic, kinufia. Kinufia is like a big gathering.
It's a gathering?
A kinufia. Kinufia, I can't remember where I saw it. Perhaps in Chagiga, where they talk about everybody gathering for the reading of the Torah every 7 years. But it's also like usually it means like a large gathering, very, very public affair, kinufia. It's like extremely public, because everybody's there, everybody witnesses.
And the next word, Movavi?
Now, Movavi, I think, means sitting down, from the word Moshav, where you have a tav and a shin being the interchangeable, right?
Right.
So that would have been like sitting down. So I would have said, if you have it gathered up and sitting, like it's gathered and sitting, almost like saying it's been gathered and put in the sitting position, as it were, right? In other words, if I gather something up, but it's clearly going to blow away, I'm saying, no, I didn't do that. I gathered up and I made it like in a sitting position, not sitting as a man would sit, but sitting in the sense of like settled. Like it's the same word, moshav. A moshav is a settlement in modern Hebrew. Why? Because everything's sort of like settled down into its place. A moshav is like a place as well. The moshav you talk about something having a moshav, it's really like its place where it sits and it does what it's supposed to do. So I'm thinking that maybe these two words combined is like saying, I gathered it and I settled it down into like its most settled position, that I hope it won't blow away. So even though I did everything physically short of putting a kli over it, I arranged it, at least physically, in a way that I could hope it won't blow away. It's just, everybody knows the reality. If you get a strong wind, it will blow away. But I did something to show that I wanted to be in that position, let's say even for more than just a few hours. So I really do hope to find it that way tomorrow. I'm saying it doesn't matter. Even if you showed that you somehow or other believe it'll be like that tomorrow, because you not only gathered it, you settled it. You pushed it down into like a kind of a settled, packed down position. But everybody knows if a strong wind comes, which often happens in the middle of the night, it's not going to be there tomorrow. So therefore, you know that. You're kidding yourself if you think it won't. And therefore, we believe you actually didn't expect to find it that way tomorrow. Now, the truth is he came back the next day and did still find it gathered up. So you say, look, I was right. Rava says, no, I still won't let you use it, because you knew it was very possible to get blown away. And even if you lucked out and it didn't get blown away, it doesn't matter. By leaving it in a way that is very much impermanent, according to, true standards of judgment, not your standards. You were very hopeful it wouldn't blow away, but most people would understand that it could very well blow away, even though it didn't even blow away. So you have the fact that I pushed it down into a position where I hoped it won't blow away, and the next day came back and actually found it still there in the piled up position. You still can't use it according to Rava, because you knew it was possible to blow away, and if the wind will come, it will blow away. So therefore, that kind of detracts from your act. Your act wasn't a proper act of preparation. And therefore, you can't rely on that to say it's not muksa. You have to still treat it as muksa. Okay, we'll stop here.